Welcome to the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, episode 12 of season 4. This is an episode that Dad and I did together, featuring none other than Russell Brand. If you guys want the video option, it's available on my channel on YouTube. Russell Brand, if you don't know him, is an English comedian, actor, author, activist, and father. This episode was insane. We spoke about family life, having kids, the role of sacrifice, mentor, apprentice relationships, seeing the divine in others, working with family, the aspiration of fame, and much more. Russell has just released an audiobook, Revelation, Connecting with the Sacred in Everyday Life, which is linked in the show notes and available at audible.com. Russell's podcast, Under the Skin, is also available on Luminary, which is a subscription podcast service, and I got you a month free by going to luminary.link/MP if you want to check it out. This episode is brought to you by Headspace. Headspace is the app I highly recommend if you're trying to bring some meditation and mindfulness into your life. Perhaps you're like me and you think sitting and meditating is a waste of time. You're wrong. I was wrong. You can use an app like Headspace for only 10 minutes per day. I'd say 10 minutes would be minimum. And it can help slow your mind down and create some peace. Given the last year, I think everybody could use a bit of that. Headspace takes you through some meditations and makes it really simple to do. I would recommend doing it first thing in the morning before checking emails and stressing yourself out. It's been scientifically proven to reduce stress, improve sleep, boost focus, and increase your overall sense of well-being. It seems silly kind of, but focusing on your breathing, doing some visualization, assisted by an attractive Australian voice, if you so choose, Headspace records different voices, you can really improve your day. You deserve to feel happier, and Headspace is a meditation made simple. Go to headspace.com/JBP. That's headspace.com/JBP for a free 1-month trial with access to Headspace's full library of meditations for every situation. This is the best deal offered right now. Head to headspace.com/JBP today. Enjoy this episode. I know it's really late where you are, so thanks for doing this and making it possible. I'm a little bit starstruck, gotta say.
Well, it's not actually that late. It's just an indication of how my lifestyle has changed. What it actually is in objective terms is 8:45. But in my new life, 8:45 is late because I live with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and of course their mother. They're my children, I urgently point out. And like, so now everything is different. There's so much life around me, Mikhaila, but of course also so much death. I'm handling the death part, they're handling the life part.
Okay, can you delve into that a little bit? What do you mean so much death?
Well, they're bloody exhausting, these children. Like the children, the animals, there's dogs, there's cats everywhere I look. There's more life. That's probably a dog hair in my mouth right now. It's just it invades every facet of my being. But
see, that's why you're supposed
wonderful
to have children when you're young and stupid instead of old and wise.
Yeah, I see that now. Thank you very much. I wish
Yeah.
I'd met you when I was 20, although I possibly wouldn't have been able to have absorbed the information then either.
No, that's another problem. I think you have to have children when you're young by accident.
That's how I did it.
Mhm.
It worked out really well.
Yeah, is that what's? Do you mean you have children, or that you are?
I do.
Your father was,
I have
really?
a 3.5-year-old girl.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that would be good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that
fun.
makes sense. Yeah, there's no other way I could have done it.
Yeah, you don't think you could have handled it? Well, how have things, you said you have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old?
That's precisely right. Yeah.
And they've been home all the time because of COVID too, huh?
Well, as a matter of fact, they do have like a play group that they can attend part-time. And actually, probably from most people's perspective, it's kind of a breeze. I mean, I'm not at a coal face. I'm not running a farm, and it's actually in loads of ways absolutely blissful. In fact, all this information really is just to sort of provide some context for how 8:45 in the evening, when more sophisticated people are sitting down to dine, is to me some kind of witching hour.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm getting tired at around 7 o'clock, especially if Scarlett comes in at night. I wanted to ask that just before I forget, and this is a question for both of you guys, but we could start off with Russell. What's been the most difficult part of having kids for you, other than being asleep early?
Well, I don't know if anything about it has been jarringly difficult, because it's been such a total transformation from not only a life, like I had a life where I'm a performer, and like sort of celebrity has been a component in my life. And so both being a performer and being a celebrity can both, I suppose, amplify aspects of self-centeredness in a way that can, in retrospect, be rather rootless. And having children in a way that I'm present for has been very, very grounding. So it's very difficult to break it down, because it's such a holistic change. It's very difficult to break it down into components, and because it is overall so glorious and sort of wonderful and profound, it's difficult to frame it as being in any way negative. But it has been wholly transformative in a way that's beneficial, incredibly important part of maturation. And like, had this happened to me in my 20s, I don't think I would have been able to have rooted myself.
Yeah, that's fair. I was pretty wild before I had
Oh,
Scarlett.
really?
Oh yeah, like in an uncomfortable way. And
Oh,
I mean, getting pregnant, you have absolutely, like, you don't really have much of a choice. If you're pregnant and you're going to have a kid, then you're immediately a healthy, sober person. So,
Unless you want real trouble.
yeah, unless you want real trouble. But that switched things around really quickly. And then the first year staying, you have to be pretty much attached. Like, as a man, if you're good and you're there, then it's one thing. But as a woman, if you're breastfeeding, then you're just completely attached to the baby for like a year. So that kind of takes away the party element too. And it probably sped up. It probably actually ended up speeding up my career because it put the partying on hold, which is a funny thing to say about having kids.
Yeah, well, my
yeah.
my observation for young people in university was that, for example, the students I had who were studying psychology, who also started working in a lab, and then so were working 12 or to 20 hours extra a week, got better grades, not worse.
Doing more things.
Well, because they had to discipline themselves and they quit wasting time.
Yeah.
And there's some real utility in shouldering the sort of responsibility that stops you from wasting time. And you asked about negative elements of having children. I think in some ways similar to Russell, at least with regards to what he said so far, is there was virtually nothing about it that was negative as far as I was concerned. I suppose I was somewhat, it was difficult to sort out how the attention was going to be split in the household. I missed your mother when she was so occupied with the infants. But having children more than made up for that. And, kids get a bad rap and people think of them as an impediment to freedom. And it's such a foolish way of thinking, because it's so remarkable to have children, and you can have the best relationship. You have the opportunity of having the best relationship with anyone you've ever had in your life when you have children. And then also, someone is finally more important than you. Hopefully when you get married or you fall in love with someone, they're as important as you, or perhaps even more so. But when you have children, it's definitively the case that now someone is more important than you. And that's such a relief. And it is a crucial part of maturation to have that happen. And I don't believe that people, I'll get pilloried for this, or maybe you will, because it's your podcast.
I can take the blame. I can handle it.
I don't think it's possible to grow up without having children.
Oh.
It's unlikely.
He's still got it.
What's that?
I said, he's still got it. He can still drop a bon mot that's going to stir people up.
Yeah, well, it's hard to grow up until someone's more important than you. So why would you? Why would you? Why wouldn't you continue being sybaritic and living, at least to some degree, for pleasure? So
It's true.
But children are amazing. And so everyone out there who's thinking about having children, you should do it, because they add to your life. And then when you're older, like me, I'm 60, almost 60 now. I have grandchildren now, and I can't imagine how empty my life might be without that and more of that on the way. So, yeah.
I know some rather brilliant people, as I'm sure you both do, that have a foregone or decided against or unable to have children. I suppose the values that are brought to the surface in parenthood are perhaps duty, devotion, and perhaps if there is a sort of some transcendent component to your life, and I don't mean that necessarily in a spiritual way, but it's difficult to avoid the connotations of that word, then perhaps maturation is possible. If you take, for example, like a straightforward mendicant's life, monasticism, celibacy, devotion in a very explicit way to God, then would you say that they are unable to reach maturity? Or what if it was a secular version, like devotion to the arts or to a sort of a political cause? Do you not think that could,
well,
of course,
that reminds me of something I wanted to talk to you about. I read your book, Mentors, which is this book right here. And one of the things that it made me think about was, I've thought for a long while that one of the processes that marks the transition from childhood to adulthood is apprenticeship. And so one of the things Nietzsche said about the Catholic Church was that the European mind, this is speaking in Nietzsche's voice, the European mind disciplined itself by adhering to a single interpretive strategy for centuries to explain everything under the conditions, to explain everything using the axioms of a single intellectual system. And that disciplined the European mind and enabled it then to go off and use other disciplinary strategies to discover other ways of dealing with the world, maybe to develop science, for example. And Nietzsche was very convinced that you had to enslave yourself in one manner or another before you could be free. And that's an apprenticeship motif. And to me, that's what you explored in your book, Mentors. You know, you present yourself, I believe, as someone who is striving in various ways to mature, and that you identified people who came into your life as targets for emulation that could impose a discipline on you and help you mature. You had a hunger for that, like people do. And yes, I do think that if you don't have children, there are other disciplinary strategies that you can use to further your maturation, but it isn't obvious to me that any of them are as profound as having children. And I mean, I've had a good career, and I've been very interested in intellectual pursuits as well. And I suppose I've disciplined myself in some manner because of that, but I still stand by my statement about children. They're in a different category of profundity. It's partly because you have to take on so much responsibility when you have children.
Is it the sacrifice too? I mean, if you think about people who work in churches, or what Russell was saying about, you know, people who devote themselves to God, and it's kind of what they do is kind of sacrificial. And I suppose part of what you do when you have kids is sacrifice that hedonistic part if you're going to be a good parent. So is part of what helps you mature the sacrifice associated with having children, or is it something else?
I don't know if that's part of what helps you mature, or if that's a definition of maturation, is that it's a sacrificial act. But, you know, people often think of sacrifice in terms of loss, but the reason you sacrifice fundamentally is to gain something higher. That's the sacrificial motif. You give up something that's attractive in the present, but the purpose of the sacrifice is to organize things more effectively at a higher level of being. So, and that is maturation. That's the forestalling of immediate pleasure for medium to long-term well-being, and maybe for more than you as well.
Okay.
I have a question, even though I know it's not my podcast. And when you transduce a metaphysical idea like sacrifice, and sacrifice as an evocation of a greater power further down the line, and you transduce it into materialist and rationalist terms, perhaps to make it more relevant to a cultural group that don't think in that way anymore, do you think that we risk missing an essential part of the mystery, that much of the devotional life by its nature doesn't have a direct translation in secularism, i.e., of course, yes, I've heard you say before, Jordan, that it's as if there were a father that's a stern father that's going to guide you and discipline you and chide you into being a stronger man or woman. But but I feel too that there is something that through sacrifice we are also acknowledging that on this plane of being, all our needs cannot be met. In fact, really all we can do is generate need, and by sort of sacrificing food or sacrificing something important, we reaffirm our connection to the sublime.
Okay, well, I think that whenever you bring a transcendent concept in some sense down to earth, you risk inappropriately constraining it if you assume that your act of bringing it down to earth has explained it fully. So I don't believe that my explanation of sacrifice explains it fully. And so I think you can retain that. You can retain the advantages of ineffability. For example, if I assess a piece of literature or a film and make its metaphysical presumptions more explicit, I don't believe that necessarily takes away from the film. It can, because it can be reductionistic, but it can add an additional, by furthering understanding, it can add an additional layer of utility to the experience. I've tried to do that with the biblical lectures I've done. For example, I'm not trying to explain everything away, although I do think that, generally speaking, you should use the simplest explanation that's at hand. So it's a risk, but hopefully it can be a risk that is fundamentally productive.
Yeah, I reckon that I suppose that mentorship and education is dependent on crossing this space between the ineffable and the at least palpable or the apprehendable to some degree.
Well, that's the thing, is that if the ineffable stays entirely ineffable, then you can't put it to use. And I think you're absolutely right that the mentorship does that, and there's a profound religious instinct there, and I think it was really operating in you. You make reference to it a number of times. For example, you had, by your own admission, a strong tendency to romanticize the women in your life. You say you deify them in some sense, or maybe more accurately, you perceive them that way to begin with, and then over time, in some sense, the stars fall away from your eyes. But that's the action of an instinct. That would be the anima projection from a Jungian perspective, is that there's an instinct in you that's pushing you towards development. And the way it manifests itself is by illuminating certain elements of your experience. And that might occur, for example, when you meet a male figure who you admire, who you then start to imitate. It's the deep workings of your unconscious illuminate that figure and make him, say, stand out against the background, because you've apprehended that there's something about his pattern of being that addresses a lack in yours. And the same thing can happen in romantic relationships, and that can also not be purely illusory. In some sense, when you have a romantic relationship with someone, you are chasing the divine in each other. Now, both of you may fall short and the relationship may fall apart, but by seeing the divine in the person that you fall in love with, you also invite them to manifest that. And by opening the door to that, they're actually more likely to manifest it. It's very complex. It's very complex and sophisticated instinct. Incredibly complex.
I understand this. I understand this. I have experienced this. I recognize that I have spent a lot of time projecting through my inability to comprehend my own psychic energies. I've projected onto another resources that were available, perhaps through tutelage within myself. One of the mentors that I write about in that book, who like has been incredibly valuable in my life, when we first met, like by synchronicity or chance, gave me a copy of the Robert Johnson's book on gold and inner gold, which is a sort of an essay on mentorship and having, holding one another's gold. And I think, yes, that how mentorship has functioned in my life I've gained a great deal of perspective. I've understood that they are kind of psychic synecdoches, holding for me a space, holding meaning. I recognize the fallibility of these people that I adore or aspire to, but in my psyche, they function as coordinates. I was just talking to a brilliant therapist today in therapy, and he said that that you don't need to overcome your father and mother in the physical world with them. You need to overcome the imprint of them in your psyche. And I said, yes, in a sense they are hollowed out carapaces in reality. I don't mean that with any disrespect to my actual mother and father, but like the mother and father that I deal with live in my psychic landscape. They don't live in Essex, England. So I recognize, yes, that we can use relationship as an external coordinate to activate dormant psychic energies.
So there's a kind of reductionism in that too, in some sense, right? Because by doing that, you reduce the experience of the divine in someone else to activation of an unconscious complex, let's say. But one of the things you point out in the book, and it's possible to go deeper than this too. One of the things you point out in the book is that when you allow or ask or invite someone to be your mentor, you also allow them to manifest that element of them that's most mentor-like. And they can do that independently to some degree of their other flaws. Just like when you're a parent, a father, you can act paternally as a figure of authority, even though you are by no means a perfect figure of authority. The child still needs you to be the best authority figure that you can be, despite your flaws, and you will manifest that. But that's also not false, because the ideal that we're all chasing, we don't know what its ultimate reality is. If you have an instinct towards further development, let's say, what that means is that there's something about you that could be greater than it currently is. And we don't know the limits to what that currently greater could be. And that's where the idea of mentorship, let's say, shades into something like religious worship, because I suppose if you think about the Christian world, the ultimate mentor is Christ. And you could say that being a Christian, or you could say that being a psychologist. And if you said it being a psychologist, you would say, well, it's by definition that the ultimate mentor is Christ. And what Christianity has been, as it unfolds itself over the last 2,000 years, is an attempt to engage all of the people within that belief system in a dialogue about what that ideal actually constitutes. And there's tradition that feeds into that, the biblical stories and the corpus of tradition that goes along with that. But all of it is a collective attempt to specify that ideal so that people can use it as a target to further their development. And that's not delusional. That furthering of development is unbelievably useful practically.
Yes. And forgive me, because I have a response question once again, and I want to ensure that Mikhaila, who surely has had a lifetime of tolerating this kind of business, her father citing Jung at passers-by, I would like to say, when Edinger, in his analysis of William Blake's engravings from the book of Job, says of the passage where Yahweh shows the behemoth and the leviathan to Job and says, look upon the leviathan and the behemoth that I have made as I made thee. Edinger, in his analysis, says that Yahweh is saying to Job here that all potentiality is held in Yahweh. It is beyond good and evil. How does this transition between an Old Testament version of God that requires of us to become good, that God itself or himself or herself is also good. How does this idea, this interpretation of our relationship with God, this Old Testament, which places this sort of obligation that sort of it punishes Job for his phatic impersonation of worship, how does that evolve into the Christian idea of Christ as the perfect mentor, Christ as the perfect
Why
emblem?
don't you ask a difficult question? Jesus. Well, you know, Jung talks about this a fair bit in Answer to Job. And that's a very difficult book to summarize. And it's also a very terrifying book. But the upshot of it is essentially something like this, which is that whatever God is, the best element of him can plausibly be brought forth as a consequence of the manifestation of what's best in us. And that might be the willingness to sacrifice and the willingness to trust and the courage to love your neighbor, the courage to love your enemy. And this is a profound question. It's like, would reality shine a more benevolent face upon us if we were all as good as we could be? And that's the Christian idea. And I can't see that that idea is wrong. Now, and I think certainly Jung interpreted the story of Job in that light, and he believed that Job sort of set God back on his heels, so to speak, by being a more moral agent in some sense than God himself was. But underneath all that was this notion that if you acted as if God was love, if you believed that, and that would be manifest in your perceptions and your actions, that would invite the deity of love into existence. And that's true. You know that when you interact with people with love, and there's a tremendous courage in that, it makes the world a better place. And we don't know how deep that reaches. You know, it certainly reaches as deep as humanity itself, and is there something transcendently real about it beyond that? Who knows? Who knows? That's a far enough target for anyone, as far as I'm concerned. That was a hell of a question, Russell.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here, just like, yep, that was, whew. But anyway, that's fine.
Not so much, because you said, you know, before we did this podcast, we were talking about mentors, and you said that your one of the things that you've done is to pick someone to imitate and to pull yourself towards them by that process of imitation. And then when you got close, you pick someone else to imitate or to compare yourself with.
Compare myself with, not
sure, but it's the same thing. The comparison is the same thing, because when you compare yourself to someone, you start pulling yourself towards them, unless you get envious and resentful.
Yeah, before we hopped on the podcast, I was just talking about how I have, like, I consistently have, I'm getting a lot of opportunities with the podcast I have, but I consistently have my dad to compare myself to, which I think is fine because I have something to aim towards and it's kind of something to get to. And that's what I've done throughout my life is, hey, that person's really smart and interesting. Try and achieve what they're achieving. And then once you get there, you pick somebody above you. And the problem is that means you're always kind of unfulfilled, but it also means you're always growing. So that's what we were talking about.
That's also why Jung pointed out, for example, he believed that the book of Revelations had been tacked onto the New Testament because the Christ in the Gospels was portrayed too much as a figure of mercy, whereas in Revelations, Christ is portrayed primarily as a judge. And Jung's explanation for that was that every ideal is a judge, and the ultimate ideal is the ultimate judge. And you could say the ultimate ideal judges your soul, and because that's virtually the definition of the ultimate ideal. And so the ultimate ideal is something transcendent and divine that judges your soul. Now, what that means about the way the universe is constituted, again, I have no idea, but the higher the ideal, the more severe the judge. That's clearly the case. And that should make you quake, I think. It does when your conscience assaults you in the middle of the night for things that you've done wrong. It's because you're quaking in your boots morally because you failed to live up to this ideal. And there's no escape from that. Not truly. I don't believe there is.
How are you to managing to conduct the intimacy of a father and daughter relationship in this new medium. Having two children, my two little daughters, myself, I love them so dearly. They're children, they're not adults, of course. But I felt like it made me like fantasize a little that, I wonder if I'll work with them. I wonder who they'll be. I wonder who they'll be. The idea of bringing your relationship into this space, has it been challenging for you, Mikhaila, particularly when you hold your father up in such high regard and such high esteem? And I know you've been through a very challenging time as a family, and thank God that you're both well now. But how is it to find yourself in this sort of situation that has a sort of a public dimension to it?
Yeah, it hasn't been easy. I mean, for my entire life, especially when I've gotten older, I've said yes to every opportunity that kind of came my way just to see where it would take me. And I think that's something I learned from my dad. Just say yes to everything and see what happens. I started like formally working for him in 2018 because I'd already built his kind of social media platforms. Just the profiles on, Facebook. I knew how Instagram worked, and I was like, Instagram's the new Facebook. Like, switch. We got to get you a profile there. So, and then I started like simple with, I was cutting YouTube videos and just making clips. And then I was booking theaters, and then I started coordinating between companies or agents. And it's been complicated with family. It's not all fun and games. And we get into serious work discussions where we're talking about, I don't know, maybe producing something and whether or not that's a good idea. And I don't really have a comparison. So I don't know if it's more stressful than working somewhere else. Like the other places I've worked, when I was a kid, I was working at like a hockey rink and as a waitress, and I was working at a club at one point, and it's not like that wasn't stressful. So I'm still working in this position. So apparently I like it. And
well, it's definitely challenging. You've taken a fair bit of public flack, I would say, for people who, because of what's happened to me over the last couple of years, because of people who doubt your motivations and,
yes,
and who feel that you might be exploiting me, which I would like to state very forthrightly is not the case. Quite the contrary, you've been of tremendous help, but it's difficult to keep those boundaries straight. I mean, the problem with working with family members is you run into dual relationship problems, and, many ethicists think those are best avoided completely. And there's some real wisdom in that, but that doesn't mean it's unethical to enter into a business relationship with a family member, but it does mean that it's fraught with difficulties. It's difficult to be a father and also supervise Mikhaila's role in my business affairs, for example, because it isn't clear when I'm one and when I'm the other. And it's, I suppose, not clear to her when she's daughter and when she's employee.
There are definitely benefits, though. I found like part of the reason I thought that I was good at the role I'm doing was because I was more comfortable pushing dads on decisions that I really believed he should do, pushing much harder than somebody else would push.
Like me, for example.
Like you would push.
She's less agreeable than me, so.
Like quite a bit less.
No.
Yeah. So I could make.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It makes getting along with people hard, but it's entertaining. Yeah, it was tricky. I mean, I like it. I've been.
I wonder. Forgive me interrupting, Mikhaila. I wonder when the conversation has a propensity to move into areas such as archetypes, and when such strong opinions are being expressed, whether or not you feel like it could be exposing just because of Jordan, your clinical background and the type of conversations that you evoke. And I'm just talking about the actual conversations themselves, let alone the sort of secondary component when other people start to evaluate, judge the stuff.
Exposing in what way? What are you thinking about? You mean violation of privacy?
I reckon provocative more. Like if someone, like I feel like if I was talking to my mother or father, it's difficult to imagine my little innocent, albeit potent children. Like, but with a parent, like I feel like that if my mother or father was talking about sort of archetypes and psychic energies and parenting, like, that I feel like that, but I could potentially feel like, hey, that sort of that territory is not entirely academic and not and not solely rhetorical, but is in this context is empirical, and I think the very fact that you're doing it is evidence of a great deal of trust and rapport, simpatico between you. But I just wondered if it how it feels now that you're actually doing it.
I think I can answer that one.
Okay, I've got an answer too. So go ahead.
At least from my perspective, people have asked me, is your dad like he is on YouTube at home? And the answer is yes. Like, generally speaking, you don't get a 90-minute sermon-like speech with nobody interrupting. But we've been talking about the meaning behind the biblical series and myths, and talking about, what do you want to do in your future since I can remember. So it's not something new at all, and it doesn't seem uncomfortable because that's how I was raised.
And it doesn't, and having a public component doesn't make it jarring.
Because there's still a distance, right? Like even in 2016 or 2017, there's a distance between reading about it in a newspaper. It's weird. Like, you walk down the street and dad was on a newspaper and I'd be like, that's jarring. But at home, it's not jarring. Even doing podcasts like this, it's intimate, right? It's just us three. So there's the public element, but maybe it would be different if it was in front of a crowd. But it hasn't really seemed less intimate. You've had a different experience.
Well, I think we're both relieved and pleased to be doing something together that isn't intensely focused on like fatal or highly painful illness.
Yeah.
Because that's just been nonstop for way too long, way too long. And so this is a break from that. It is very strange, but we're in a strange world. I'll never get accustomed, I don't think, to the degree to which I've become public. And that's something I wanted to ask you about. I mean, you got famous, and there's nothing more appalling than people who are notorious or well-known whining about their fame. And I don't want to do that. But it's still something interesting to note and to contemplate and partly to get a handle on. It's been very difficult for me to reconceptualize my circumstances, given that I became well known when I was relatively older. It happened after I was 55, and it's strange. It's strange to understand that the conversation that we're having, is going to be watched and listened to by some hundreds of thousands of people, or perhaps more than that over time. It's uncanny in some sense and surreal.
I just don't understand those numbers, so it doesn't, like, I can't understand those numbers.
Yeah, well, and you've grown up with the reality of YouTube, for example. Like, you've grown up in a world where you could be a TV producer as well as a TV consumer. I mean, when I grew up, when I was your age, even a bit younger than that, when I was in my teen years, we had 2 TV channels. It wasn't long before that the United States only had 3. And certainly there was never any conceptualization that any particular individual could become a TV station or a media center. And so it's a very foreign reality for me. And I guess I do have some sense of the numbers, perhaps, because I've done so many live talks and I've seen very large crowds. And in any case, the reason that Mikhaila and I do this in large part is because, well, we're curious. We wanted to see how it would go, but we're also seeing if we enjoy it. And I'm happy to be here doing something like this with her. It's a real privilege. It goes back to, having children. I
don't even have a joke. I don't even have a joke right now.
I suppose, too, this has been enhanced by my ill health in recent years, but I always feel that it's a privilege to spend time with my children. And I have some sense of how fast time goes. I've always had a very acute sense of the finitude of existence. And so, and this is a good hint for people who have children, but with regards to your family members at all, is don't take it for granted. Every second you get that isn't painful, you should cherish.
Yes.
God, I'm maudlin.
Oh, you came up with the joke. That's good.
I felt like I took it as an expression of your love for one another, just with the content that I'd watched, and I imagine that would be the motivation, given the trials that you've endured with regard to your health, and then this is of course entirely speculative. That that what preceded it in the rather unique, certainly unparalleled cultural position that you, Jordan, had occupied leading up to the period of abstinence and its accompanying medical complexity. And I know that, but like sort of Tammy, and I know that Mikhaila, I know that sort of health issues have been quite prevalent because I'm familiar with you and I'm familiar with your work. And I sensed that it was a sort of a culminative expression of love and gratitude and warmth, and an opportunity for you both to be together. And it's very heartening to hear that it's that. With regard to your sort of inquiry about the nature of sort of public life, for me, the older I get, the more I recognize it was an unsophisticated attempt, as perhaps all early grasps at the Grail must be, of trying to heal the seminal wound of seeking some kind of value, of trying to impose some kind of myth in a mythless world, some pursuit, something of value to chase after, and then increasingly discovering as various points in the journey were arrived at, that it couldn't fulfill me. Now, I was sort of comparatively old also, like I wasn't like 16, I was like 30 when I sort of became well known, and when I started to make films in America and things like that. And I always felt that there were, I'm sure numerous, but at least two sort of streams running. One, this sort of like a need for validation and approval on a scale that could only indeed be provided by YouTube numbers, Mikhaila. I'd need to see that speedometer clocking up the 100,000, 200,000. There can never be enough, never a high enough number. This is that lies at the root, perhaps, of all addiction, this constant requirement for more, and no way of healing that wound, not materially at least. But
some of that's even actually healthy, Russell. I mean, one of the things that we do constantly is to evaluate our worth by the responses of others. And, if that's all you do, that's a mistake. And if you're doing it in a false way, that's also a mistake, because then you're gaining as a consequence of doing something that isn't real. But like, the person who cares nothing for what anyone else thinks is actually a psychopath, not a saint. And so it's easy for that mechanism to go astray in a world that's so dominated by social media, because, when before social media, if you were a teenager, it was really important how your peers responded to you. And it should have been, because that's part of apprenticeship. You're socializing yourself against the group at that point, and their opinion should matter. You use them as a proxy for your parents, to escape from your parents. It's crucial, even though it can go too far. But now that's elevated to such an immense degree. It's like pornography or cocaine. Both pornography harnesses the sexual drive, and drugs like cocaine hijack the incentive reward, the pleasure circuit. And they're unbelievably powerful. And it's not surprising that you'd be addicted to watching the numbers rack up. I mean, I can see that and experience it as well. It's almost impossible to avoid wanting to see the numbers climb. And to some degree, that's egotistical, and it can really lead you astray. But to some degree, it's just the natural workings of a mechanism that is actually there in part to keep you socially acceptable and sane.
This potency that you describe with cocaine and pornography, it's difficult to locate comparably potent influences when it comes to more positive attributes, alongside my like craving for attention, etc., and perhaps warped ordinary anthropological drives for acceptance, was always a vocational urgency, a devotion, like an untapped or at least misguided devotion to that was always present there. And I feel that sort of many of the things that I've heard you previously discuss chime with this, if they do not express this exactly. That the problem of not having a shared public myth is that everything is up for grabs for being anointed with that status, without a clear depiction of God as ideals, God as shared standards. Then why not just pursue fame? Why not just pursue coke if nothing means anything anyway? And it's only sort of more recently with in my case, a sort of a spiritual program through the 12 steps, through mentorship, through the obligations that having people that rely on me for their own recovery, as well as being a father. That these, I wouldn't call them secondary, I'm sure they're primary characteristics, but they were secondary in my own behaviour, have been brought to the forefront, have been realised, actuated. And like that, to your point earlier about sort of mentorship, is not that they just exhibit the divine and that it's, it's only relevant in so much as it may activate the divinity or sublime energy in the mentee. I see it's beyond that. I see it somehow as a kind of symbiosis, a kind of osmosis, a kind of that it isn't ultimately the optimistic view of life, one of oneness, one of love, that's separate, that we are not ultimately separate. Therefore, there is recourse to the universal. There is a possibility of me, in admiring another person or adoring another person, imbibing and taking on these attributes. If the ultimate reality is separation, separateness, I sometimes
I think that takes us back to the discussion about the so-called Christian transformation of the idea of God. I've had Jewish friends of mine point out that the God of the Old Testament gets a bad rap from Christians to some degree, and that there's a lot more love there than you might presume if you viewed the New Testament as a transformation of the Old Testament God into the God of love. But we'll leave that aside. I think it's a valid point, but we'll leave that aside. The question, if you're mentored in a particular direction, well, here's how you might conceive of it. Is there something that all mentors share in common? Well, you would say so because they're all in the category mentors. And then you might say that, well, whatever all mentors share in common is the pattern of the divine. Again, that's almost by definition. Now, then there's a deeper question, which is, okay, if what all mentors share in common is the pattern of the divine, is that a real pattern? And the answer to that, to some degree, is, well, you'll find that out by acting it out. And it seems to me that the answer to that has to be yes. I mean, if we're adapted to the world, and if we pursue the fullest extent of the possibilities of our adaptation through mentorship, then, and if that improves the quality of our life, then it seems that whatever it is that mentorship is pushing towards is real insofar as it works in the world. Now, does that mean it's materially real or objectively real? I don't think that reality is bound completely by the categories of objective and subjective. I don't think that captures the entire essence of reality. And so, but I don't believe that our instinct towards mentorship is a delusion. I don't believe that our religious instinct is a delusion either, even though all instincts can go astray.
Yes, and when you were saying that this idea of Christianity being that, if we live in God's light, or we aspire to God's light, or if we embody God's love, then that this is beneficial. I was thinking how, as a paradigm, it's comparable to the Taoist idea that you are bringing the path into being as you walk it, that you are like that reality is interacting with your consciousness, that your belief, your perception, the manner in which you behold and enact your life influences life, becomes life, is life. And in that tradition, and let me tell you, I know barely anything about it, it's sort of presented in a more Gnostic way. It's sort of somewhat more opaque, it's more minimal, as one would expect, housed as it is within that culture. But the central message appears to be the same, that there is no objective, that these categories of objective and subjective perhaps have to be simultaneously held, perhaps opposed, perhaps are interchangeable, that reality is being believed into being through our consciousness, through the agency of our consciousness. Certainly we can never know what reality separate from our consciousness is.
Well, I don't think we would ever sacrifice if we didn't believe that reality was opaque to our beliefs, because we sacrifice because we believe in the possibility of a better future being brought into reality by our actions. And that actually seems to work. I mean, it's quite remarkable. We can imagine something, we can strategize toward it, and it generally, it manifests itself well enough so that we don't stop doing that. And it's quite remarkable that that's the case.
On that note, I hate to break this up because we're getting going, but I know that we have a heart out. So, Russell Brand, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh my God, are we done already?
I know, it was fast, but that was fun. Thank you very much. Where can people watching find you?
I have a podcast called Under the Skin, which is on Luminary. I have a book coming out on Audible, which I'd love to talk to you about, further about the finding the sacred in the everyday, with the rather grand title, Revelation. You'll be pleased to hear, like where I'm just talking about that I personally can't live without sacredness present in my ordinary life, and how I find it in a post-secular world. Like when you were just talking just then, sorry to interrupt my own hard out, but I was thinking that perhaps much of the dissatisfaction, polemicism and fragmentation that we're currently experiencing is a result of people not feeling that agency, not feeling like this like the ability that you say to manifest your reality through the practice of certain principles. It feels like that we're having a sort of an externally imposed nihilism, that you can't influence reality, that you can't impact reality. These swathes of disillusioned, disenfranchised, dismissed people. It just occurred to me when you were talking just then.
I think you can influence reality. That's what I've decided. It's too weird. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. It's the simplest explanation.
So when is that book coming out, Russell?
I think it's in March, which might be so far into the future as not to exist in the sort of social space that we're currently occupying.
In March. How long have you worked on it?
I worked in it for a couple of years, sort of like leading up to and during the pandemic. Do we still have March? Is March still a thing? Do we have equinoxes now, or equini? What is reality now?
Well, hopefully we'll return to something more approximating normal reality when this pandemic ceases to exist, God willing.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy to see you looking so well, and to see you both together as a family, as a father and a daughter. And it's very comforting for me as a father of two daughters to see you working together well, and to see so many of the principles that you have espoused and beautifully articulated, Jordan, manifest in you, Mikhaila. It's a real privilege to meet you both. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell Brand.
Very good to see you again, Russell.
I hope I get to see you. I've got your email. I'll be in touch. I've got both your emails. Stay in touch.
You have a remarkable capacity to dig into things.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a beautiful compliment from you.
Yeah, well, it's quite striking. I remember the last couple of times we spoke, I was struck exactly the same way, is that you have a very fast mind, and it goes down a long ways.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful compliment. If it were earlier in the day and I'd made the giddy life choices to have children in my 20s, I would stay up now with pornography on another screen and cocaine on the back of my hand, chatting into the long hours. But perhaps if those were the choices I made, I wouldn't find myself in this esteemed company.
Well, have a good
On
night.
that note,
Yeah, have a good night.
good
God
night.
bless you both.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you.
So we just finished talking to Russell Brand.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
I told you I watched Rebirth, which is his comedy special from 2018 yesterday. I wanted to ask him, but there wasn't time. I wanted to ask him a couple of questions, and one of them is how he's so verbally fluent. So I can just ask you that. Like, is it he's just really smart? Or is it because he's read a lot and watched a lot? Or is he just naturally like that?
He's really smart.
So then the rest of us that aren't like that, or we're just never going to be that?
He's really smart. He's also extremely high in openness, that creativity trait. And so people who are high in openness can see patterns, but a lot of that's you're born with that. It can be hurt and ruined.
How would that, by trauma? It's like PTSD type of thing.
Malnourishment.
Oh, just brain development, you mean?
Yeah. But a lot of that's the way he is. You know, he was born like that. I've met a number of people like that. Camille Palia's like that.
Ah, it's very, very sharp and fast,
Ben
right?
Shapiro. Although Ben isn't as open as Russell.
Yeah, he's crazily open. He connects ideas from all over the place.
Yeah.
You're pretty open and verbally fluent. Like when I go to your lectures or when I hear you talk sometimes, you'll go off on a tangent and I'll be like, he's gone.
Yeah.
There is no way that whatever he started an hour ago has anything to do with what he's talking about now. And then it'll be like, attach it. You'll just attach it at the end.
That's
like,
fun.
how do you even remember?
That's so fun.
How do you even remember what you're talking about?
It's like if you're listening to a great piece of music, like a Bach concerto, say, Bach will go off on a tangent and then he'll return to a theme, and it's so satisfying. You hear that goes, bum, and it just flattens you. And it's that ability to make things come together. It's so exciting to be able to do that. And that's one of the reasons I love lecturing, is that I can go out on a tangent, way out, and explore, and then think, okay, that comes right back here. And if I'm in good shape, I can do that continually in a lecture, right? Because I can remember the thread and I can go back. But if I'm not in good shape, when my health starts to go, I can't keep all those things.
You can't remember it.
I thought, even when we were talking to Russell, there were times I thought I'd listen to his question, a long question,
hard. Though.
And
like most people, like I said, when I went like this, I was like that. I don't know what I was there, and then he said something, and I didn't know where he was going with that, and then I lost it.
Did you lose it, or were you afraid and let yourself lose it?
I don't know what the difference would be.
Well,
between those.
I thought that you didn't give yourself enough credit, and that it was maybe your fear of not being able to understand that made you say that. I mean, did you feel that there were parts of the conversation that you didn't understand, all things considered, or were you speaking specifically about the question that he asked? That was the question about the transformation of the idea of God. It's kind of a highly technical question.
I don't think there were parts I didn't understand. There are references he made that I didn't pick up on.
Yeah, fair enough.
So that made the questions more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Well, and
luckily I know a little bit, like when he was talking about Job and the references there. He said one thing. He said, oh God, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was something about Job's false. He said something that just, wow. Something like he was faking something towards God. Mm. Did you pick up on that or no?
No, I can't remember that part specifically.
I can't remember it exactly. I just remember that I was like, that was weird. I was going to comment on it, but now I can't remember. No, I actually do think I have trouble. I think because of how ill I was and how many medications I was on, like I've done, for whatever it's worth, I've done IQ tests over time. And I know it can change when you're younger and when you're older, but they kind of measure that.
They're pretty stable, man.
Okay, it's stable. Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, when I was on medication, when I was trying to get better when I was 22, and so I was taking, Adderall, and I was on Cipralex and immune suppressants and Tylenol 3 and antibiotics and gravel and trying to like stay awake, prop myself awake and things, I hit 122 on an IQ test. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty good. I hit 132 after I went off of all my medication. Right? And my memory has improved so dramatically. Like I couldn't remember phone numbers. I couldn't remember 7-digit numbers. So I honestly believe, like when I took OxyContin for a while, it was about 2 years after that where my memory just, when I was in class and I'd put up my hand, I'd be that student they'd call on and I'd go, I don't remember what I was going to say. And it's not because I wasn't paying attention. I honestly couldn't remember what I was going to say. So I was writing everything down so I could remember it. So I do think part of my developmental years being sick too, not just the medications, but also being sick has dampened down my ability to remember even like questions like Russell was posing.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to remember all the ideas that are in there.
Yeah, well, I wasn't sure, but to be fair, he asked some very complex questions as well.
Yeah, and I think he went easy on us, to tell you the truth. I've heard him talk sometimes, and I think he's tired. It's good. His kids are dampening him down.
There's health. The health is really relevant because I also find like identifying patterns like that and going way out on a tangent and coming back and holding all those things simultaneously takes a tremendous amount of energy. You know, I found the conversation with Russell took a tremendous amount of energy, and it isn't obvious to me that I have the stamina for it. Like I pay for it. It also makes me wonder how much I paid for doing all the lectures that I did in that short period of time from 2017 when I did the biblical lectures through all that.
I get people like, I don't know. I've seen you lecture at university and things, and you were on fire when you were lecturing to the public, like in 2018 particularly. And that must have taken a massive amount of energy because it was really long lecture. Like it wasn't how long were you lecturing for?
90 minutes.
Yeah, so 90-minute lectures, then a Q&A, meeting people. You were eating like 4 times a day, and then you'd fly to the next city, right? And you did, how many cities did you do?
130 to 150.
I thought it was 180.
No, it's not that many. But it was
whatever, 130 to 150. Okay, that's enough, right?
Yeah, in about 200 days.
Yeah, so a lot of people message.
Yeah, well, I did the biblical lecture series in 2017 in the fall, and then went to Europe for the book launch, and then I went on the tour.
Yeah, and even the biblical series here was intense.
Very.
So I don't know. I get people.
I wish so much that I could do another one on. See, I can't even remember the book now.
Proverbs.
The Moses books, Exodus, because I have all that material in my head.
You're gonna get, like part of the problem. Okay, everybody has this if they ever get sick, and I've been sick so much that I know this to my core. But when you're still sick, there isn't really anything you can do about it except wait to get better. And then as soon as you're better, you don't even remember the period of time that you were sick.
Yeah, I don't.
You're
know
like,
how to, you're like
that. That was. Nobody knows how to wait. Okay, when I was healing my ankle, I repeatedly injured it because I was like, oh, I'm feeling a little better. And it wasn't my fault really. I was like, I'll just wear a pair of shoes that are a little bit closer to flat, just a little bit closer to flat, and I'd go a little bit closer to flat, and then I wouldn't be able to walk for 3 weeks. And I'd be like, that's not fair. That's not because I wasn't paying attention. Okay, it's just because my body is slow. And like I said, when I got off of OxyContin, it was 2.5 years, and there was absolutely nothing I could do about it. And when I got off of SSRIs, it was the same thing. There was nothing I could do about it. And then when it's gone, you got to wait for the time when it's gone.
Yeah, I don't.
Waiting is horrible.
I don't know how to live like that because throughout my whole life, I've juggled as many things as I could possibly put up in the air all the time, and that was exciting and fun. But
I watched. Yeah,
and I don't know how not to do that.
I've only been experiencing that, juggling a whole bunch of things now. I didn't experience that earlier, and I'm not very old, right? I'm 29. I'm almost 30, but I'm only experiencing the juggling act now because I was too sick before.
No, it's so fun to see how many things you can do. You know, and it forces you to get efficient too in such an interesting way. You think, well, you shouldn't take on more, and you think, well, no, that's not necessarily true, because as you take on more, you get better at delegating and you get more efficient. And so then you can do more. And
Yeah. And it's hard to know when you can't do more. Right?
Well, I kind of learned when I was writing, when I was writing Maps of Meaning, I spent 90 minutes to 3 hours a day on that for about 15 years. And at the same time, I was raising a family. And, although obviously your mom took primary responsibility for the continual childcare, I was around a lot. And I had my job as a professor in my clinical practice and all of that. But you can tell if you're doing too much if you can't sustain it across days. So I would find some days I could write for 5 hours, but then what would happen is the next day I was impaired in my writing, or 2 days later. So you have to push yourself to see what you can iterate across days. And I found that I should never write for more than 3 hours. I wore myself out so that I was stealing energy from the next few days. It produced less productivity rather than more. And when I worked with counseling, I counseled lawyers mostly they were high-end lawyers working in very prestigious law firms. And the deal that the company I was working with made with their firms was that we would work with them as individuals, but we would produce a productivity gain that would pay for the treatment, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And often you can measure lawyer productivity by billable hours. And so the law firms want to push the billable hours up above 2,000 if they can. That's a lot, right? Because there's only 365 days in a year. So that's 6 hours a day across weekends and everything.
Of solid work.
Yes, of billable work, man. Right? That's efficient
hard.
Work. That's not administrative work and that sort of thing. But often what would happen as a consequence of the conversations I had with these people is that we would plan for them to take time off. It had to be planned several weeks or months in the future. And that actually made them more productive.
I've heard that. I've also heard that if you allow particularly productive people to work from home, that they're more productive.
I often worked from home.
Yeah.
And although there were conditions for that, I had to be a junkyard dog. This is a good piece of advice for any of you out there who want to write or to pursue anything that's your own interest, is you have to cordon off a space and a time for that. And then you have to guard that. I always thought the metaphor that struck me was junkyard dog. Like I was a junkyard dog when I was guarding my time to write. And when your mom would come in, I'd snap at her. Or you kids, it was like, don't bother me. I'm writing. And the reason for that was, I might have had 30 ideas in my head that I was trying to explore.
Where I've got, okay.
And then if someone came in and interrupted me, all that
everything
would fall. And it'd be like an hour of thinking. And I had all these plates up in the air and then they would all fall. But so yes, you can work effectively at home, but it's difficult to cordon off your time, partly because if you're writing particularly, you're doing something that might not work, like it might not bring any money, you might not be able to sell it. Mm-hmm. It's a long-term game, and there are short-term emergencies that are always calling out for your attention.
Yeah, that appear to be more important than whatever you're doing, because whatever you're doing isn't showing any benefit yet.
Yeah, well, that's
right. It's just a time suck that has a question mark for the payoff.
Right. Exactly. And so well, you can increase the chance of the payoff if you're actually disciplined and productive. So, I mean, I trained myself to sit down and write every day. And I wrote, even when I didn't have anything to say, it would take me 20 minutes. All the little devils in my head would be telling me that I wouldn't be able to think of anything today, that there were other things I should have been doing, that this whole thing was a waste of time. And I'd have to quell all those. And
that's fun.
And then I could write. As I wrote more and more, the amount of time it took to quell those decreased. And then if I was tired, it would increase again. But I found, and this might be useful for people too, you can force yourself to sit and stare at the damn blank page. If you do that every day, you'll write something. You'll write a paragraph, you'll write 2 paragraphs, you'll write 3 paragraphs, you write a single sentence. If you do that for a couple of years, you have a book. And Hemingway wrote something that was really useful to me too. He said write every day and make that a habit. But he also said, stop when you still have something to say and just make a few notes about what you have to say, because then the next day you can pick up where you left off. And that was also very useful.
That is useful.
It's really smart.
So I've been writing this memoir. So I think I haven't really had times when I don't know what to say, because I'm not, at least at the moment, I'm not connecting grand ideas about the universe. I'm recollecting what happened to me. So I'm not making anything up. Not that you're making things up, but it's literally events that happened in my life. So I don't think I've ever had writer's block. I certainly have the problem where I have a whole bunch of other things, especially because I'm juggling a whole bunch of different parts of whatever it is I do. I have a whole bunch of things that I'm not doing all the time. There's this huge list of things I haven't had time to do, and it's always there.
You're so lucky to have that. I had that for so many years, and I don't have it at all now, and it's killing me, the lack of that. I just can't stand not having that.
You're going to get it done.
And it was like that it's a real, but it's good to know that that's a privilege. You know, your life is full when you have too much to do. But then you have to learn how to manage having too much to do. And the first thing you have to realize is that it's always going to be like that, as long as you're fortunate and opportunities keep coming. So then what do you do about that? And the first answer is, well, you don't wear yourself out.
Yeah. So that's something we could talk about a little bit. And I'm completely aware of how fortunate I am, because I was so sick that I couldn't do anything. Like, I waited for the periods that I was really sick, especially when I started the diet, went off of SSRIs, and was like having those kind of severe neurological problems. I spent weeks being like, I just have to stay alive and I'll just watch TV. And I hate watching TV. Like, I really don't like watching TV. It's a complete waste of time.
Not if you're watching The Simpsons.
I don't even like watching The Simpsons anymore. Like, I don't like watching TV unless I'm sick. Mm-hmm. And so there were weeks where I was like, this is what I'm doing. And I had this idea. I was like, I know I'm going to get better. One day I'm going to get better. I don't know when that is, but one day I'm going to get better. And so I'm going to wait.
How do you think you were able to maintain? See,
I was angry. Okay. Like, I had a couple of good days where I didn't have any arthritis. My skin was healed and I was happy and I was clear and my memory was good. And I had a couple of those days and I was off on my medications and I was like, this exists and I'm not making it up. This reality exists. And so when it went away, I thought, something I'm doing is wrong, perhaps, but that reality exists, and like, fuck you, world, but I'm getting back to that.
Yeah.
And you're not taking that away. And I was like,
why do you think you had that?
Angry.
I'm asking partly because I've lost it.
I know. Well, I don't.
You know, I had a vision of you once. I remember this, that you emerged. I was experiencing some pain because I'd become more aware of in how much pain you were in. And I had this image of you coming out of the darkness. It's kind of hackneyed when you describe it. But you were on the back of a dragon, and it was the dragon in the chaos, and you were coming out of that on the dragon, right?
And that
bursting out of it.
That was right before, so that vision was right before I moved out, and it maybe half a year before I started getting healthy. It was right before, if you remember, maybe 6 months before I started getting healthier. So the first time I experienced that was when I needed my ankle replaced after I had my hip replaced. And I had my hip replaced. People watching would know I had my hip replaced when I was 17, and I was in so much pain I couldn't sleep. I couldn't put my hip in a comfortable position. Like, usually if you have kind of like a broken bone, except it was way worse. I've broken my arm, and needing a hip replacement was way worse. I had my hip replacement. It was absolutely brutal. I was healing from my hip replacement. I'd kind of come to terms with the fact that I was a 17-year-old with a hip replacement, and then my ankle stopped working. And I just like, it's like, it makes me upset now to think about it. It still hurts. So
that's trauma. Like, I've seen that in my clinical practice, is that people get traumatized when something bad happens to them, and then just as they're recovering, they get laid low again. Boy, that takes the
Yeah,
stuffing
that's
out of
just because
people.
you're like, oh, I just made it. And you're just like climbing up,
Yeah.
bringing your head above water, and then you get pushed under
And
again.
you used a lot of energy to do that.
Like all your energy.
Mhm.
And I was on a whole bunch of medication. I was barely holding it together, and I was like, oh, I'm finally through it. And then they're like, oh, you need an ankle replacement, and it's going to be 3.5 years of waiting. And I was like, I can't wait that long. I'm going to die. Like, I'm going to do myself in. I can't not sleep for that long. And I was in bed. You were there. And I was just like having a panic attack. I had like, I don't know, hours. I don't know how long it lasted. Hours of pure terror because I thought I was going to kill myself. And then I don't know how to explain it, but something snapped. And that fear got, what I actually did was I thought, okay, how long can I keep this up for realistically without a plan? And I thought, I think it was June, because I had my hip done in May. I think it was June or July. And I thought I can last until October. I can last until October, and then I'll start to make a plan, right? I'll just last until October, and then I'll make a plan. So I put that off into the future, into a bearable moment. And then I believe it was August, we found out that I could have my ankle replaced, because you did a bunch of organizing to get it replaced faster, and we found out I could have it replaced in November. And by that time I had a potential end date, but something happened that day, and I remember it kind of visually, that I put walls sky high, like all the way up, that I could see between me and the pain I was experiencing. And and I turned it into anger. And I can remember the walls going up, and I've had a really hard time bringing them down. And Andre's helped me since I got healthy, because I had put the walls up between me and everything that could hurt me. I don't know if any of this is helpful, but I
can't make contact with that anger. Like, I've been able to use anger my whole life. You know, it's one of the sources of energy that I've drawn on, even in my lectures. Aggression, that energy put in positive direction, but I can't access it.
When you're depressed enough, like when I started the diet, and when I got off of SSRIs, and I started having those like hallucinating reactions, and I was really depressed, I didn't have that anger when I was really depressed. I only got that anger when the depression came up a little.
Well,
there's
anger is partly a positive emotion.
Yeah, and there was nothing there. So, but I knew I had experienced it. So a couple of things I got good at being sick. One is I knew that everything I was thinking was possibly a lie, because I was extremely depressed. I was having these hypomanic periods, and I knew how volatile I was around other people. So I kind of thought, okay, everything I'm thinking might be a lie. So I have to think about this logically and kind of unattach myself. So when I was having these reactions and severely depressed, and I didn't have that anger, I just kept repeating, there was that one time that I felt good. And I do believe that the body has a capacity to heal. And so I should be able to heal and get that again. And then I just waited. And then when I got thanks, but I made it through, man. So it wasn't fun. It was horrible. But then also experiencing that has allowed me to help a lot of people. Like I get a lot of people who their friends and family don't understand, because if you have never experienced severe illness, you can't understand it even when you see it. And sometimes that means that when you see it, it makes you angry. So a lot of these poor, suffering people who are chronically ill, who are going, I'm hurt, I'm hurt, I'm hurt. Look how hurt I am. People are just like, stop it, right? I don't want to be around that. And it's probably some sort of evolutionary response to avoid infection. I don't know what it is, but sick people get a lot of hate for being sick.
Well, it's frustration too on the part of the people around them.
Yeah, and sadness, right? And it's a lot easier to be angry at somebody than sad at them.
Well, and to understand what they're going through, you have to allow yourself to feel that.
And sometimes if you can't help, it's easier being mad at them than being like, wow, life is so unfair, right? So I get a lot of people reaching out saying,
and it is, that also brings up the issue, I don't know what to think of this, but sometimes some of that cruelty, so to speak, is pushing. It's like, get the hell up, get going.
I know,
and sometimes people need that, although, I'm less certain of that than I used to be.
Well,
do you think what do you think of the way that we treated you when you were a kid and you were sick? Do you have any residual?
Let me answer that carefully. For the most part, I think that my illness was so complicated that I don't harbor any resentment about it. I'm probably still a little bit, maybe resentful is the right term, unfortunately, about some aspects. Like when I was a teenager, I drank, and it's not like especially after I had my hip and ankle replacement, because I hadn't gone out for a number of years and I just wanted some fun, right? After being like suicidal for a year. And so I drank. And before that, I started drinking when I was like fairly young, kind of once a week, and was probably drinking more than I should have. But I was absolutely miserably depressed. I had this idiopathic hypersomnia and I couldn't stay awake, and drinking made me feel good. Like, it didn't just make me feel normal. I had energy. And I think there was some blaming the drinking for my sleeping and my health. And I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think I was using alcohol as a, treatment. I don't know. I'm not.
See, your mom asked me the other day if I felt guilty about the way we treated you when you were a kid.
And?
Well, I don't.
Well,
I can remember one time when I put you up against the wall in the bathroom when you were mouthing off to your mom. And you were being very disrespectful to her. And I think both your mom and Julian, who were also there, thought I went too far at that point. And I think probably I did. I was doing it to some degree calculated, like I wanted.
Well, you were probably trying to break through the haze I was in, but good luck, it was medication.
I was trying also to ensure that you didn't act in a way that would alienate you from your mother.
Yeah, I think
But we
I think it was extremely complicated, and you talked about how sometimes the negative, I guess, pushes can push people out. Like, there's some people, this is the fat part of the problem I have with the fat acceptance movement. There's a whole bunch of problems,
that's a
but
good
one
example.
of them is there are people who are, okay, it's complicated. I've heard from people who were pressured to get thin, who got thin and healthier. I've heard from people who were pressured to get thin and they ate more, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on the person.
Yeah.
But you always told
it's
me...
the same with disciplining children, is the disciplinary strategy has to match the child, and the parent for that matter. There's no one size fits all. You were much easier to discipline, especially when you were a little kid, than your brother was. It was easier to stop you when you were misbehaving.
I've noticed that Scarlett doesn't respond to negative feedback, really.
Julian was like that.
She doesn't really care. She's just like,
yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah.
I'll just go do what I want. And I'm like, what? I don't really...
Can you talk about the offers that you've got recently?
Yeah, that'd be fun. I've been thinking of doing... I used to do... You put up some Q&As on YouTube and do kind of more personal stuff. And I haven't, mostly because we've been dealing with health things. I think that's actually the main reason, but also because I was like, well, people probably want to hear the interviews more. But now that I've become more sure of myself, I think I might start the Q&As up.
I don't think necessarily that people would want to hear the interviews more. I mean, when I did Q&As, they were extremely popular.
Oh, I like
more
them.
Popular than the interviews.
Yeah, that's interesting. So
yeah.
I think I will.
I'd like to do them again, but
we should start doing them up again.
We're thinking about it.
What you have to, you're going to be limping along for a while because you can't go through some health catastrophe and then pop back up. And it's really annoying, especially if you're a hyperproductive person. And I've talked to a lot of people who have sick kids And they go, oh, I'm feeling so horrible for this sick child. Like everything is unfair. And what I've told them is, one, I think that they can get better, right? If you look everywhere for answers. But two, it's not as hard. In my experience, it wasn't as hard being a sick kid as it was being an adult that was sick. Because if you're healthy and then you get sick, you have a comparison. Like when I grew up and was limping around, all I did was adjust my movements so it didn't hurt as much. I didn't think, damn, it used to be better when I could run, right? So it's going to be harder. And then when I got healthy, right, and then like went off of all my medication and got sick kind of again in a different way, I was just like, you're kidding me. Or when I got pregnant, my arthritis came back. I was just like, that's what made me angry, I guess, because I was like, how is this happening again? There's got to be a way out. But it's harder psychologically as an adult, for sure. But you're going to have to limp along and do podcasts and do Q&As. And that's way more work than most people are doing. But you're not holding yourself to a most person's standard, so that doesn't matter.
I don't know if it's more than most people are doing. People work.
Media-wise.
Yeah.
That's what I meant. I
That's
mean, it's
why I
not
was
14
clarifying.
hours. It's not 14 hours waiting tables.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is work.
Yeah. For sure.
Just
I was
wanted to
waiting
make
tables.
that clear.
Okay, yes. We're clarifying that. I'm
Yeah.
not ditching on waiters.
Right.
I was a waitress. My feet hurt.
Right.
I didn't really enjoy it.
Right.
I didn't enjoy it at all. But produce and then wait. And one day you're going to snap out of it. And then you're going to be on top of the world. And I will be here to tell you that repeatedly throughout this period of time. But opportunities that I've had, some summit called the Canadian Wealth Summit. This is so random. I say yes to everything, right? For now. Although I say no to some things now, which is nice. I'm like, oh, I'm at the level where I can say no to a few things. That's kind of cool. But the Canadian Wealth Summit reached out and asked me to do some of their, like,
Are you saying
serious...
no? Or are you choosing between things?
I'm choosing between things. Between things.
That's not the same, right? No is when you could do it and you say no. Choosing between things is when you don't have enough time to do all of it.
Yes, that's true. I'm not just arbitrarily saying no. I'm judging opportunity and saying no to the ones that don't make sense,
Right.
or
Well, I'm just
aren't leading
clarifying
to
that
me.
so that everybody listening knows
okay.
is that.
Thanks. Good to have you here.
Yeah.
But I have an opportunity to interview Edward Snowden and a bunch of other like potentially very interesting people. And so like one of the things I've been trying to do with my brand or whatever it is I kind of started in the food health kind of sphere. I was doing conferences at PaleoFX and KetoCon and low carb stuff. And that's because of how shocked I was that food mattered. I was like, oh my God, everyone, look, I'm cured.
How long did your mom tell you that?
Yeah, but she didn't say only eat beef, okay? Like,
I know, it was
she said
complicated.
it's food somewhere, but if she didn't say it was all foods, who was going to tell me that? Only eat beef, you'll be cured. I probably would have tried it, though. Do you remember how much I like jerky? I can remember, like, thinking back, I see all these patterns. Like, I asked for jerky for Christmas. I remember going out for, I think it was Morgan's birthday, and I got a steak for dessert. What do you want for dessert? A steak. Like, I wanted it. But, like, who's going to tell you that? Anyway, I thought that I think that diet is, like, the most important element to health. What you ingest is the most important element to health. But because I've kind of sorted it out enough myself, I want to do other things.
Yes.
And I was like, what if I've niched myself in as this, like, quacky beef girl? It's like, I don't want...
That's a very narrow niche.
It's a very narrow niche. I don't really want to be quacky beef girl.
That's a good t-shirt.
Quacky beef girl. No, I'm trying to move away from that. But it looks like because I've started this podcast, I've started talking to other people that will talk to me, that I'm getting other opportunities.
Why do you think people are willing to talk to you on your podcast?
Well, I guess there's a number of reasons. One, I think I listen, and I think I hope I'm fair. Like I've started this new series, which I'm really excited about, called Opposing Views, where I'm interviewing people from both sides of a contentious subject. So I released one about porn, and I'm releasing one about abortion, and we're going to talk about BLM and these subjects that are very one-sided, and most people only hear one side of the story. And people are tentatively saying yes, even though they're on both sides of the argument.
On opposite sides.
Yeah, and so hopefully I'm less aggressive, but I'm not too much of a pushover. And then of course my platform's grown, so most people will just say yes to opportunity. There's also a link to you, so I can get guests easier because you're my dad.
What do you think about that? Do you think are you taking unfair advantage because of that?
No, I think anybody who wouldn't take advantage of opportunity that comes their way is losing out. Like I can see.
Do you think you're taking advantage of me?
No, not at all. I think I've helped you grow. Like I think social media, I mean, you disappeared for a year and a half. Nobody would have known what was going on, and I kind of kept people updated. And social media is a huge aspect of kind of communication and keeping people around. Mm-hmm. So no, I don't have any like guilt or thinking I did anything wrong. I think people misunderstand that, but I think those are people that are going to be angry no matter what I do.
Yeah, well, you can understand why there might be some skepticism and some poking,
Well, certainly, especially with the Russia thing. I get it, but they weren't here. Thank God for them, because maybe they're not having nightmares. Like,
oh yeah, man.
Yeah, so I don't know. Plus, I do know that if you get, like, the bigger your audience, the more criticism you're going to get. I might be getting more criticism than the average slob.
Maybe.
But maybe not, right? And I think if I hadn't been so stressed out,
well, I think you're also at that point in the Pareto distribution where you've grown your platforms enough so that they're now feeding back into themselves, right? You're well known enough. You have a large enough market so that other people are going to see it as valuable. Thanks, Mick.